Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. Most tales begin at their inception, but this one finds its clarity at the conclusion. So here I am, seated in a corner booth at a waffle cafe, the clock marking 3:30 in the afternoon. Behind me, two women are locked in an animated complaint about their boss, while ahead of me, a trio eagerly demolishes their toast. Hardy, the ever-efficient waitress, has just refilled my glass. That's when a shadow stretched across my table. I glanced up, my tone tinged with sarcasm. "Well, Max, I was beginning to wonder if you'd show up." Standing before me was Maxwell Sanchez, my former father-in-law. "Floyd," he began hesitantly, "can we talk?" For 8 years, I had known Max as the embodiment of authority. Yet today, for the first time, he seemed diminished, less like the invincible figure I had contended with, and more like an ordinary man. It was unsettling. "Sit down, Max," I said, gesturing toward the booth opposite. "You're drawing attention." As he complied, curious eyes from nearby tables flicked in our direction. Max had always been larger than life, a towering 6'6" with the presence of someone who commanded empires. He owned the region's biggest warehouse and operated the only substantial freight business for miles. When the economy faltered 16 years ago, he not only survived, but thrived, becoming an anchor for the struggling community. Yet today, his unshaven face, shadowed eyes, and weary demeanor spoke of sleepless nights. "Floyd," he began, his voice laden with gravity, "I know you're hurt, but can't you and Penelope move past this situation?" "Situation?" I echoed, my voice steady despite the tempest roiling within. My heart thundered in my chest, and my palms were damp, but outwardly I remained composed. Around us, patrons strained to listen while pretending not to. If they wanted a performance, I decided to deliver. "All right, Max," I said, my tone measured. "Which part of this situation are you suggesting I overlook? The part where it was just once?" I leaned forward. "Because it wasn't. It went on for years, and you know it." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I let the silence hang before pressing on. "When I first met Penelope, she had this game. She'd flaunt every man who had ever been interested in her, almost like she wanted to push me away. Was that her intention?" "She wanted to see if you'd fight for her," Max replied defensively. "And like an idiot I did," I said, spreading jam over my toast with deliberate calm. "I gave her all the attention she seemed to crave. Then she brought me home to meet you. From the start, you hated me. My job, my outlook, my politics. Nothing was good enough for your daughter." Max's face hardened, but he couldn't deny it. "Did I ever belittle you in front of your friends, Max? Did I publicly argue with you and make you look like a fool? No, I didn't. But you did it to me without hesitation." I sipped my drink, studying his reaction. He had come expecting a broken man, someone defeated. Instead, he found me ready to confront him. "Do you even grasp what she put me through? Her old friends started reappearing. She insisted it was innocent. Maybe it was, but she wanted to test me, to see how I'd react when she spent time with men she'd once been involved with. Was that fair, Max?" I paused, letting my words sink in. And then came the women. Out of nowhere, beautiful women started pursuing me. They appeared at my workplace, at the gym, even at the grocery store. One cornered me in a supply closet, claiming she was naked under her dress. I told each one of them I was engaged, but it didn't stop. Leaning forward, I locked eyes with him. You know what the kicker was? On our wedding day, those same women were there. Friends, relatives, people from her past. It was all a test, Max. They wanted to see if I'd falter. Do you think I passed? His expression darkened, but he remained silent. "And then there was the prenup," I continued. "If I cheated, I'd lose everything. If she did, practically nothing. Well, except for one clause your lawyer crafted. $12,000, my clothes, my car, and my grandparents' tiny house. That's what I'd be left with if she broke her vows. I leaned back, a bitter laugh escaping me. But I signed it, Max. Do you remember that? I signed it because I thought it wouldn't matter. Because I believed in her. What really happened last Saturday? It began with an unexpected call from work. I was pulled into an exhausting 8-hour shift because someone had decided that riding roller coasters was more important than their job. My plans for the day were already ruined, but I had no idea how much worse it would get. Right, Max? After dragging myself through that grueling day, I finally made it home, ready to unwind. But as I pulled up, I found my driveway occupied. Forced to leave my car on the street, I stood there, fuming, wondering who had the nerve to take my spot. Assuming it was one of the neighbors, I thought perhaps Penelope had forgotten to ask them to move. Yet, when I stepped inside, I saw her car sitting snugly in the driveway. But Penelope? Nowhere to be found. "Penelope?" I called out, my voice echoing through the house. "I'm home. Are you upstairs?" Her voice drifted faintly from the bedroom. Unaware of what awaited me, I climbed the stairs, intending to ask about the parking issue. When I opened the door, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. There she was, in our bed, my bed, entangled with another man. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't notice me until I blurted, "What the hell is going on here?" It was a stupid question given the obvious answer. My wife was cheating on me. Penelope didn't flinch, didn't apologize. Instead, she coolly said, "Oh, sweetheart, I love you, but I need more than what you've been giving me. Don't worry, this doesn't change anything between us. It's just physical intimacy." Her audacity left me speechless. As if that wasn't enough, the guy, a complete stranger in my house, sat there as if he belonged, calm as can be, while Penelope carried on. Then, to add insult to injury, she asked me, "Darling, could you bring us something to drink?" Her words snapped me out of my daze. "You want me to get drinks for you two?" I spat. She smiled as though I were some waiter at her beck and call. "Yes, maybe something from your stash of beer?" That was the last straw. "If you want a drink, get it yourself," I growled. She sighed, exasperated. "Don't be like that. We agreed. No lies between us." The man chimed in with a smirk. "Hey man, don't ruin the vibe. You've got her most of the week. Just let this slide." That did it. I stepped toward him, glaring. "Say that again, and you'll be drinking through a straw." He shrank under my stare, his cocky demeanor crumbling in an instant. Turning to Penelope, I made my decision. "You can have this house. I'm done." I stormed out, seething, only to run into her brother, Mike, in the hallway. "What a twisted family," I muttered. "Your sister's in bed with some guy and you're just wandering around." Mike held up his hands as if to calm me. "Floyd, wait. It's not what it looks like." I wasn't interested in explanations. "Get out of my way," I snapped, trying to push past him. But he grabbed my arm. That was a mistake. I'd never liked Mike, and that moment pushed me over the edge. One punch was all it took. Aiming for his jaw, I accidentally struck his throat. He went down like a sack of bricks. Without a second glance, I went to the bedroom, grabbed my camping backpack, and left. As I walked out, I heard Penelope shouting, her robe flapping as she chased me. I didn't look back. Thankfully, I still had my old house, which I'd recently renovated. It hadn't been rented out yet, so I made it my refuge. The next day, I returned to collect my belongings. Thankfully, the house was empty. I packed up my clothes, essentials, and anything else I couldn't leave behind. Then I swung by the Salvation Army to buy a cheap bed. Sleeping on the floor wasn't an option. When I arrived back at my new haven, who was waiting for me but Penelope? She rushed toward me, desperate. "Floyd, please, I need to explain." I ignored her. I stepped inside and locked the door. She banged on it, rang the bell, and shouted, but I was done listening. She'd made her choice. Eventually, the police arrived and convinced her to leave. My house was mine alone. It was in my name. Monday came, and I took action. I withdrew $12,000 from our joint account, canceled every shared credit card, and started fresh. I contacted SNK, a company I'd hesitated to join because Penelope thought it was too risky. They offered me a great deal, and I accepted. Later, I walked into my boss's office and handed in my resignation. "Tom, I'm leaving," I said firmly. "Why?" he asked. "Because I was finished. Finished with the lies, the humiliation, and the life I thought was mine." The man leaned forward in his chair, concern etched deeply across his face. "I thought you enjoyed working here," he said quietly. "Honestly, I can't stand it," I admitted, my voice firm. "You're a great boss, and I mean that. But this job isn't what I envisioned when I graduated. And now, with everything that's happening in my personal life, I need to leave. I just found out my wife has been unfaithful, and I have to get away." His eyes widened, disbelief evident. "Are you saying Penelope?" I nodded, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Yes. I'm grateful for everything you've done, but my mind is made up." Tom sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. "I hate the thought of losing you. Are you sure there's no way to work this out?" "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "Thank you for understanding, Tom." Leaving his office, I walked past his secretary. She sat at her desk, chatting animatedly on the phone, her demeanor casual and unconcerned. But I knew better. She was likely relaying every detail she'd overheard. Ignoring her, I made my way to meet Mrs. Hines, my divorce lawyer. A sharp woman with a mind for strategy, she had her assistant handling much of the paperwork. However, another person had joined the meeting, someone who wanted to ensure Penelope wouldn't receive the divorce papers at her workplace that coming Tuesday. The past 2 days had been a blur of advice and pleas for reconciliation. After the papers were served, people kept urging me to give her another chance. I refused every time. I had no desire to revisit the situation. Deep down, I suspected Tom's people had been keeping tabs on me, maybe even tailing my car, in the hope I'd reconsider. Did they really think I could be swayed? "Max," I said, my frustration bubbling over, "what's the point of dragging this out?" He leaned forward, his voice heavy with curiosity. "So, she cheated? In your own home?" "Yes, Max," I snapped bitterly. "That's exactly what happened. But the question that keeps me up at night is why?" I couldn't stop analyzing it. At first, I had the urge to confront them both immediately, but I held back. Was it about her own insatiable desires? The thrill of betrayal? I had done my best to keep her interested. Surprise notes, calls just to check in, thoughtful gifts. But to her, they were meaningless gestures, dismissed as unnecessary. Was this her revenge for something? No, it didn't add up. I had never been unfaithful to her, not before or after our wedding. Sure, there had been rumors about a bachelor party years ago, but nothing had happened. I spent that evening trying to mediate a fight between Stacy and Mike. Could even that have planted resentment in her mind? Or was this a twisted test? A way to see if I truly loved her, or if I was just using her for the money she poured into her beloved edible flower business? Maybe she wanted me to find her in the act, hoping I'd lose my temper, either fight him or storm out. Could that have been why Mike showed up, to stop me from overreacting or ensure I didn't leave? Was she waiting for me to prove my devotion by enduring her betrayal? I refused to play along. I walked away instead. For years, I'd tolerated her family's constant meddling and her endless challenges. And what did I get in return? Not trust, not respect, certainly not love. In the end, I came home to find her with another man, a final cruel test to see if I'd keep jumping through hoops. That was it. I was done. Max's tone was almost pleading. "Is there really no way to save your marriage? Penelope loves you, you know." I laughed bitterly. "She loves me? Max, I'm drained. I have nothing left to give. The bell above the Waffle Cafe's door jingled softly, and I looked at Max with finality. Whatever you did to raise your daughter like this, I'm done dealing with it. She'll never change. She needs someone who can endlessly prove how much they need her, over and over again. I'm not that person anymore. She pushed me too far. I loved her once, Max, but she killed that love. Congratulations to all of you. I stood up, grabbing my jacket. Max remained motionless, silent. As I turned toward the door, I saw her. Penelope stood by the counter, her eyes rimmed with red, her chin trembling. She must have overheard everything. Yet, as I looked at her, I felt nothing. Pulling a $20 bill from my pocket, I set it on the table, turned away, and stepped out into the cool night air. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. I hadn't planned to eavesdrop, but sometimes the truth slips in uninvited, whether you're ready for it or not. It was a Saturday night, and we had people over. Her friends, her family, the ones she always seemed more comfortable around than she ever did with me. I was in the kitchen, stacking dishes, half listening to the chatter drifting in from the living room. Laughter rang out, that kind that makes you feel like you're on the outside of an inside joke you'll never get. Then, I heard her voice. He can't satisfy anyone. It wasn't just what she said that cut deep, but the effortless way it rolled off her tongue. Casual, offhand, like it was a well-known fact, something everyone there already understood. The laughter that followed was genuine, hearty, from people who clearly agreed with her. I didn't even know what they'd been talking about before that. Maybe she was complaining about something minor, bringing home the wrong coffee, failing to fix that dripping faucet last week. Or maybe it was something more. How I never bought her the gifts she really wanted. How I lacked the romance she craved. How I failed to make her feel special in the ways she desired. It didn't matter. The meaning behind her words was clear. I stood there, my hands clutching the edge of the sink, silently hoping she'd take it back, say it was a joke, soften the sting somehow. But she didn't. She kept talking, moving on to another topic as if her words hadn't just hit me like a blow to the stomach. I didn't feel angry, not right away. The first thing I felt was humiliation, a burning embarrassment that crept from the inside out. I felt small, laid bare in front of people who probably already saw me as less than I thought I was. Then it hit me. This wasn't new. She'd spoken about me like this before. I started replaying past moments in my head, the cutting remarks, the sarcastic jokes, the way her eyes would roll when I spoke, the heavy sighs when I fell short of her expectations. It had been going on for years. I just hadn't let myself fully see it. To her, I wasn't a partner. I was the punchline. I let the noise from the other room fade into the background as I stood there motionless. The laughter became a distant hum. I finished cleaning the dishes but stayed rooted in place. My hands pressed against the counter harder than necessary. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I had spent years twisting myself into knots trying to make her happy, thinking that if I just tried a little harder, she'd see me differently. If I gave more, she'd love me more. But that wasn't how it worked, was it? She never saw the effort. She never noticed the sacrifices. To her, I was the man who never measured up, someone she could mock in front of friends and family without a second thought. And that's when something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to confront her in front of everyone, demanding an apology. I wasn't going to make a scene. That's what the old me would have done, the version of me always trying to fix things, to smooth over conflicts, to prove my worth. Instead, I made a decision. I was done trying to please her. I spent the rest of the evening like a ghost in my own home. I responded when spoken to, nodded when expected, but I wasn't really there. My mind was elsewhere, replaying years of moments I had buried. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the house fell quiet, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, She drifted off to sleep quickly, as if nothing had happened, as if the evening had been perfectly normal. But for me, everything had changed. That one thoughtless comment had unlocked a door I'd been avoiding for years. A door filled with moments I had minimized, excused, convinced myself weren't as bad as they were. The memories came rushing back. Birthdays where I'd planned surprises, only to hear her sigh and say, "You really thought I'd like this?" The night I cooked dinner, and she took one bite before wrinkling her nose and pushing the plate away without a word. The rare times I dressed up for date nights, putting in extra effort, only to have her glance at me and say, "That's what you're wearing?" One memory bled into the next, a reel of every time I felt less than in this marriage, yet I kept trying. I remembered the first time I overheard her talking about me to her friends. It wasn't as blunt as what she said that night, but the message was the same. I brushed it off, telling myself everyone vents, that it didn't mean she didn't love me. I had convinced myself of so many things over the years, that her constant criticisms were just her way of pushing me to be better, that her coldness wasn't intentional, that her unhappiness wasn't about me, but about her own struggles. I had rewritten the truth over and over to make it bearable. But lying there, replaying every moment I had dismissed, something inside me broke free. I had poured so much of myself into making her happy, believing that if I just did more, if I just became better, she'd finally see me the way I saw her. But that night, I finally understood. It was never about what I was doing wrong. It was about the fact that nothing I did would ever be enough. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Not free, not unburdened, just aware. Aware in a way I hadn't been before. For so long, my life had revolved around keeping her content. Every decision, every little gesture, every word I spoke was filtered through how she might respond. Would she be annoyed? Disappointed? Would she find something to criticize? I had trained myself to adjust, to anticipate, to tread carefully. It was like living in a house where the floorboards were always uneven. I had gotten so used to walking carefully that I forgot what it felt like to move freely. But now I didn't feel like tiptoeing anymore. I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't sit her down and say, "I'm done trying to please you." That wasn't necessary. What I did instead was much simpler. I stopped. I stopped going out of my way to seek approval that was never coming. That morning, when she walked into the kitchen while I was making coffee, I didn't ask if she wanted some. I just poured my own cup and sat down at the table. She paused, waiting, expecting me to offer. When I didn't, she let out a small, irritated sigh and made her own. It was a tiny act, almost meaningless, but to me, it felt like the first crack in a dam. Later that day, she asked me to pick something up from the store. I had other plans, things I wanted to do for myself for once. In the past, I would have dropped everything to run the errand, to avoid conflict, to keep her from sighing and giving me that disappointed look. But this time I simply said, "I can't. I have things to do." She blinked, like she hadn't heard me right. "You can't?" "No, not today." She scoffed, muttered something under her breath, and walked away. I braced myself for the usual guilt. That was the pattern. I'd say no, she'd react, and guilt would gnaw at me until I gave in. But this time, there was no guilt, just relief. I had spent years over-explaining, justifying my own boundaries like I needed permission to have them. But why? She never gave me the benefit of the doubt. She never tried to see things from my perspective. Why was I exhausting myself trying to be understood by someone who had no interest in understanding me? So I stopped explaining. If I didn't want to do something, I simply didn't. If she made a sarcastic remark, I didn't argue or defend myself. I let the comment hang in the air until she realized I wasn't going to bite. If she complained about me to her friends, I didn't sit there absorbing it like a sponge. I didn't want to be cruel. I wasn't looking for revenge or trying to play games. But I had spent years bending over backward for someone who never once met me halfway, and I was finished. At first, she didn't notice. She was so used to me accommodating her, molding myself around her moods, her needs, her expectations, that the change didn't register immediately. But then, little things started to pile up. I stopped filling the silence when she sighed dramatically, waiting for me to ask what was wrong. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I stopped putting her comfort ahead of my own. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I finally walked away from the game I hadn't even realized I'd been playing for years, and that's when she started to notice. It began with small things. "You're acting weird lately. Is something wrong? You're different." At first, she probably thought it was temporary, that I was just going through something, waiting for her to check in. But I wasn't waiting. I had stopped expecting anything from her, and that shift unsettled her. She began to probe, tossing out subtle jabs to see if I'd react. "You never get anything right. You'd be lost without me. God, you're impossible." In the past, I would have jumped to defend myself, desperate to prove her wrong, to show her I was enough. But that man was gone. Instead, I let her words hang in the air, met with silence before moving on, unaffected. They no longer had power over me. The first time I reacted this way, just looked at her and walked away, I caught something flicker in her eyes. It wasn't anger or annoyance. It was uncertainty. That's when it hit me. She'd always held control, not through direct demands, but through silent expectations. Over time, she'd molded me, wearing me down like water on stone, until I became someone who never questioned, never pushed back, existing solely within the lines she drew. But that version of me was gone, and she didn't know how to cope. I watched her scramble to reclaim control the only way she knew how, by picking pointless fights, criticizing things that didn't need criticizing, throwing out offhand remarks designed to bait me into a reaction. But I was done playing, and that terrified her because for the first time, I wasn't scared to lose her. She tried everything. When the usual tactics failed, she switched gears. At first, she ramped up her efforts. More sarcasm, sharper, passive-aggressive digs, more attempts to see if I'd crack. But I didn't. I stayed calm, denying her the reaction she was fishing for, and that's when I saw the panic creep in. It showed in the little things, how she lingered when I didn't respond right away, how she watched me, searching for signs that I still cared like I used to. She wanted me to argue, to push back, to prove I still needed her approval. But that guy was gone. Then came the anger. One night, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, completely at ease. She paced back and forth, muttering under her breath, the tension in the room thick enough to cut. I knew what was coming before she even said it. "You don't even care anymore, do you?" She stood there waiting. I looked up. I had options. I could have denied it, tried to calm her down like I used to, or pretended for the sake of peace. But I didn't. "No," I said, plain and simple. That was it. No excuses, no justifications, just the truth. And that's when everything fell apart. She lost control, not with rage, but in a way that showed she realized she had none left. She threw out every accusation she could think of. I was cold. I'd changed. I was selfish, distant, a stranger. "You're not the man I married." That made me pause. For the first time in years, I looked at her and agreed. "No, I'm not," I told her. And I wasn't. I wasn't the man who walked on eggshells to keep her happy at my own expense. I wasn't the man who swallowed his own needs to avoid conflict. I wasn't the man who needed her approval to feel worthy. I wasn't her version of me anymore. And I think that scared her more than anything because, finally, she understood. I wasn't afraid of losing her, but she was terrified of losing the man she'd controlled for so long. She didn't take it well. After that night, after I told her I wasn't the man she married, something between us snapped. The illusion I'd clung to for years crumbled. At first, she pretended nothing had changed. She went through the motions day after day, expecting me to slide back into old habits. She made little comments, ran subtle tests, trying to spark a reaction. But I gave her nothing. And that's when the silence settled in. She stopped trying to provoke me. She stopped trying to talk to me altogether. Our home, once filled with tension, became filled with something else, distance. And I welcomed it. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly bracing for the next criticism, the next sigh of disappointment, the next moment where I felt like I was failing. I wasn't failing anymore because I had stopped playing the game. There was nothing left to prove. Then, one evening, she finally asked the question, "So what now?" She stood across the room, arms crossed, her face guarded. This wasn't about dinner plans or the weekend. This was bigger. We both knew it. I took a deep breath. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know I'm not going back to how things were." She stared at me for a long time. I saw something shift in her expression. Maybe regret, maybe realization, maybe just fear, because she finally understood. I was done. Not just with the arguments or the endless need to prove myself. I was done being someone I wasn't, just to hold together something that had never truly been whole. I don't know what she expected me to say. Maybe she thought I'd suggest fixing things. Maybe she hoped I'd say I still wanted this marriage. But I didn't. Because I didn't want this. Not the way it had been. Not the way it would always be. And I think, deep down, she didn't want it either. We had been over long before I stopped trying. The only difference now was, I knew it. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.